Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear the true allegiance to the Republic of Uganda.
President Museveni on Wednesday was sworn in for a 7th term in office and the 8th overall, further upgrading his credentials in the league of longest-serving presidents in the world. During his speech at Kololo Independence Grounds, Museveni, who at his inauguration in 1986 said Africa's problem is leaders who overstay in power, fired barbs at the West.
Therefore, quite comic and laughable to hear of some actors in the world giving us lectures about democracy. You give me a lecture about democracy? What are your own credentials?
Perhaps the message was meant to rebuke Western powers who think his long stay in power has diminished the country's democratic gains. However, barely after the 2001 polls, Museveni considered quitting the presidency after his term in office that was meant to end in 2006. A highly placed source says that in 2002, Museveni sent his surrogates to foreign lands to study the blueprint of orderly successions which would be transplanted into the country. His team travelled to Tanzania and South Africa to study their succession models, but later on, the plan was shelved. The task was to craft a succession plan based on the ruling parties of African National Congress ANC in South Africa and Chama cha Mapinduzi CCM in Tanzania to be able to retain power long after Museveni had retired. Chama cha Mapinduzi and African National Congress remain two dominant political parties to date. In Tanzania, President Julius Nyerere had in 1985 tapped his vice Ali Hassan Mwinyi as his successor and only remained in the shadows as the party chairman, during which course he privately crusaded for future presidents Benjamin Mkapa and Jakaya Kikwete. In South Africa, President Nelson Mandela ruled for one term and passed the mantle to Thabo Mbeki, who was succeeded by Jacob Zuma. Zuma passed the baton to the current President Cyril Ramaphosa to extend the reign of the ANC. The team presented its report to the president in December 2002. During discussions, the team even proposed that the then Vice President Specioza Wandira be dropped so that the position can be occupied by a likely successor to be groomed in statecraft and introduced to foreign powers. There was also a hybrid model next door in Kenya. President Daniel Arap Moi, who had taken over following Jomo Kenyatta's death in August 1978, had turned out a thorn in the flesh of Kenyans, but was constitutionally negotiated out of power in 2002. As a way of persuading him out of power, it was agreed that Moi would be immune from prosecution after his presidency. People familiar with the matter, however, say Museveni's consideration of retirement was a result of pressure exerted by Dr. Kizza Besigye, who had broken ranks with the system earlier in 1999 after authoring a missive detailing how Museveni had betrayed the ideals that inspired the 1981-86 rebel war against the Obote II government. Besigye rode on the wave of reform to offer the fiercest competition then to Museveni in the 2001 polls, where he came second with 27% votes.
When we embedded the safeguards in the Constitution twice, and I think that's where maybe there was an error of judgment, at least on my part, was to trust that there are Ugandans who would stand firm, mostly when they are trying to ensure that what was in the law was entrenched by their own actions. I think that's why we made a misjudgment. About him, I didn't bother so much as to whatever his intentions would be. But I believe that they would be checked.
When the manifesto of the elections of 2001 was made, a number of us insisted on, because now the issue had come, the candidature of Dr. Besigye had come up, and a number of us did say, okay, let the manifesto be clear that the term limits would be respected. And indeed, the president asked for the last term a number of times within the manifesto. And some of us thought that that was actually genuine.
The removal of term limits was launched in March 2003 during a Movement National Executive Committee meeting at the National Leadership Institute, Chankwanzi, and in 2005, MPs, after receiving 5 million shillings each, voted to drop Article 1052 from the Constitution, which barred a president from serving beyond 2 terms. Museveni first promised to serve as interim president till 1989, but he sought an extension granted by his then Attorney General, Professor George Kanyehamba. In 1996, barely a year after the 1995 Constitution was promulgated, President Museveni subjected himself to the first democratically held election since Uganda's independence to test drive the new Constitution. He won the polls with 74% against Paul Kawanga Semogerere. Since then, he has indicated on numerous occasions plans to retire, only to flip-flop.
Are you going to run for another term?
We will follow our constitution.
In May 2012, during an interview on NTV's political talk show On the Spot, this is what he revealed.
What is your personal view on the term limits?
My view is that it is a lot of nonsense, because as long as there are elections, the people should elect. And there are some good examples. If you take a country like Israel, for instance, indeed all the European countries, they don't have term limits. Except, I don't know which ones have term limits. It's only the United States. But all the others, Britain, I think even France, certainly I know Israel, as long as the people are electing, that would be the limit. If the people don't want you, that's the end of the story. So it's a diversion. It's not a serious issue, in my opinion.
So how about if the term limits are lifted, then why should the country have the age limit? What is your view on that? Should the age limit also be there anyway?
Well, that one, I think that one we had ignored. We had not discussed it. It can be discussed, but since we had not, but I think after 75, the vigor, I think there's some scientific idea there that maybe the vigor is not as much after 75 years. So that one I wouldn't quarrel with some. I know there are some leaders who have been leading even beyond 75. But I think if you want very active leaders, it should good to have the ones below 75.
A year later, in April 2012, during an interview with the American television network CNN, President Museveni said he would step down in 2016 if his ruling NRM party asked him to. It did not take long when he was crowned sole candidate to contest in the 2016 polls and subsequently engineered a scheme to remove the age limit, which was the last constitutional stopgap measure against a possible life presidency. While on re-election campaign trail, the president told a January 9, 2016 press conference in Tungamo district that he cannot leave power when all that he planted is starting to bear fruit. Former presidential candidate Mugisha Muntu, who joined the Bush War in 1986, told NTV that Museveni has mastered the art of manipulation and deception.
Museveni, unfortunately, using the gift of studying human character, chose to take the negative path. That's why he knows where he uses money. He knows those who are so absorbed in pomp and glory positions. And then he knows those who fear, where he uses fear, or at times a combination of those.
He said Museveni cannot imagine a moment when he is not in control.
Now, General Museveni, the most unfortunate thing, several things, but when they come together. But when you break them apart, first, his management style. By nature, he's a micromanager. And it doesn't matter even if it was not in politics, if it was in business or wherever else. And micromanagers manage things by wanting to be in total control.
In his swearing-in speech this week, Museveni spoke at length about a host of subjects, including extolling his government's democratic credentials.
We designed this system not from the air-conditioned rooms, but from the jungles of our country, where we lived with the people in their hearts in those days for much of the 16 years of the resistance, 1971 to 1986.
However, one subject matter he has avoided lately is the subject of succession and the peaceful transfer of power. Former Inspector General of Government, who broke ranks with the NRM and joined the FDC party where he served as a senior official, Augustine Ruzindana, told NTV that the transition talk is now a tired subject.
It has lost meaning. But what we should ask is, how do we move forward in a way that maintains the stability of the country? The primary element now is the stability of the country, and all of us have a stake. Wherever we may be, we have a stake in the stability of the country. So, how do we maintain the stability of the country in a manner that does not lead to the growth of the frustrations among certain sections of people?
He said those in power need to reflect as the country continues to be polarized.
It can be in a form of national dialogue, it can be in a form of a national conference and so on. The issue that would be discussed is who would take the initiative, who would be part of it, and so on. We must find a way of bringing down the pressure that has been building up within the country and so on. The reaction of government has been from one side. The reaction is the more use of hard power, security, arrests, and so on. That actually raises, makes it more important that to diffuse the pressure within the country, there is a need for more for consultation. There is a need for dialogue.
I heard him talk about the unit of Africa, the unit of East Africa. You are weakening your own people. You're talking about strength through unity. How? Strengthen the Ugandans. Let someone in another country strengthen Kenyans, Tanzanians, like that. And then when they come together, then they'll be strong. You can't create strength out of weakness. You've got human beings here, taxpayers, adults, 18 years and above, selling their vote for 1,000 shillings. And you think that's strength? You have so disempowered people at that level, and you're talking about strength? What kind of strength are you talking about? He just...
As he embarks on his next term, Museveni will need to navigate a number of sticky issues, among which are accusations of gross human rights abuses, largely targeting Bobi Wine supporters, rising youth unemployment that has created a groundswell of resentment, institutionalized corruption, and a bloated bureaucracy.
Yes, we are at home. They cannot cut our speed. No!
But you essentially look at the manifestos, and they are all talking about the same thing. They are all talking about the growth of the economy. They are all talking about doing something to the health sector, the education sector, infrastructure, and so on. And so there isn't much difference on the policy. And so eventually it comes down to personality. It comes down to personality, and that's why the person that has been around for a longer time, and a fairly long time, becomes an issue. And rather than articulating the policy matters and so on, it goes to slogans, agenda, and so on. We are marching to State House and the like. And the actual content disappears. And we come down to that. So the polarization in the country is essentially economic. It is expressed in political terms at a different time, but the polarization is actually economic.
There's still time. If he wants to carry out corrective actions, he can. Because even when the Christians know that when Jesus Christ was put on the cross, there were two men. One of them was so desperate and frustrated, and he started hurling abuses. The one said, "Remember me when you go to the kingdom of heaven." And in a sense, he was like repenting at the last moment. I don't know which direction President Museveni wants to take, whether he'll carry out corrective actions or whether he's bound to keep moving where he's heading. That's his business. He's the one who will have to make that choice.
While Museveni has publicly lambasted the West for meddling in local politics, it emerged days to the swearing-in that State House had engaged a foreign lobby group, Mercury International UK Limited, to negotiate access to certain circles, both in Washington and in Europe, where without a doubt he still needs audience as he navigates the dicey path towards 40 years in power.